Hello and welcome. I'm Light, and this is my channel. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Idaho 4 murders, or sometimes referred to as King Road Murder House. Before we get started, please remember to do all the things: thumbs up, subscribe, and leave comments. But I want to introduce you to the people that we're going to be talking about. I think it's important that we see them, get to know them a little bit, and understand them. There were 6 people in that house that night, in the house on King Road. There were 2 survivors. One was Bethany Funk, and the other was Dylan Mortensen. And nobody knows why those 2 were able to survive. There were 4 victims. First, Xana Kernodle. She was 20 years old. She was a marketing major, and her friends and family describe her, literally the word was sunshine. She was special. They say that there was nobody else like her. She lit up her room. The second victim was Ethan Chapin. Ethan was dating Xana. He was 20 years old. He was a triplet, and all 3 siblings attended the University of Idaho. He was majoring in sports and recreation, and he's described as always being fun, always having a smile on his face. The next is Kaylee Goncalves. She was 21 years old, and she was going to graduate in December. She was going to be an elementary school teacher. She was lovely and bright and funny. There was Madison Mogan. She was called Maddie, and she was 21. She was from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and she was a marketing major. Everybody said that she brought light into a room, that she was fun to be around. All these people were described as kind, loving, happy, smiling, warm. Maddie and Xana worked at a restaurant called Mad Creek. They were all in sororities, and they were 20, 21 years old. They were living their best life. It's a time in your life when things are supposed to be safe and new and exploratory, and you start to find yourself. And then I want to tell you why I know this area so well. I grew up in Washington State, Spokane, Washington. And when I was that age, me and a friend of mine, we would take a road trip to go to Moscow, Idaho, to go to the University of Idaho, where my friend went to college. And just 9 miles away in Pullman, Washington, is WSU. So they're very, very close together. It is a party town, both of them. And we would go, allegedly, to Bar Hop. They're very small towns, rural. The universities are quite large, but it's a university town. So most of the people who work there live in the surrounding area. We, for the most part, felt safe. And on one of our trips, we stayed at a friend's house, apartment. And that apartment was on King Road, across the street from this house. I know the area well. Earlier on the evening of November 12th, 2 of the 4 victims, Xana and Ethan, had gone out. They were reportedly at an on-campus party at the nearby Sigma Chi fraternity from 8 p.m. until they returned home at about 1:45 a.m. that evening. The other two victims, Kaylee and Maddie, had gone to the Corner Club, which is a downtown sports bar, and they got there at about 10 o'clock. They left there at about 1:30 a.m., and somebody who was live streaming on Twitch just happened to get them on video at a food truck called the Grub Truck. It was 4 blocks south at Friendship Square, and it showed the two of them leaving at about 1:41 a.m. They were talking and laughing. They were getting their food, and at first it was said that they took an Uber home, but the police later said that it was somebody that they knew, and was a very, very short ride to their home. In fact, the two of them arrived home at 1:56 a.m., and according to the surviving roommates, the 4 of them were home by 2 o'clock in the morning. There were 7 unanswered phone calls that were made from the phone of Xana to her former longtime boyfriend, which was a fellow student, and they were made from 2:26 to 2:52 a.m. And 3 unanswered phone calls were made from Maddie's phone to the same person from 2:45 to 2:52 a.m. Those calls were investigated, with the police concluding that they did not believe that the recipient of those missed calls was involved in the crime. A DoorDash order labeled for Xana was delivered to the house at 4 o'clock in the morning. The 2 surviving roommates had both returned about 1 o'clock in the morning, which is how they knew that the other 4 were home by 2. The original report stated that both surviving roommates were in their beds on the ground floor at the time of the killings, and they were not attacked, nor were they held hostage, and that neither had woke during the killings. However, the probable cause affidavit for the case said that one of the surviving roommates stated that she was sleeping on the second floor, the same floor as Xana and Ethan, and that she had been awakened by what sounded like Xana's dog. She stated she later heard a roommate saying something to the effect of, "There's someone here." The roommate stated that she believed that this was Xana, although investigators believe that this could have been Kaylee, because Kaylee was on her phone on TikTok at 4:12 a.m. The surviving roommate stated that she opened the door twice within a short span of time, and the second time she heard what sounded like crying coming from Xana's room, and a male voice saying to her, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Security cameras around the home picked up the sound of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog barking numerous times, starting at about 4:17 in the morning. The murders of all 4 roommates took only 16 minutes to commit. The surviving roommate opened the door a third time, and what she saw standing as close as she said possibly 3 feet from her was a figure dressed in all black clothing. They had a mask that covered his mouth and nose, and he was walking towards her. She also said that he had bushy eyebrows. The man, whom the roommate stated that she did not recognize, walked right past her and used the sliding door to exit. She stated that she stood in a frozen shock phase, fight, flight, or freeze. She was frozen. And then she said she locked herself in her bedroom. The 4 victims were stabbed to death on the second and third floors of the residence where they had been in bed. The victims were not gagged nor restrained, and the walls at the scene were spattered with blood. In fact, there was so much blood, the police said it was more blood than they had ever seen in a crime scene, that it was gruesome. Gruesome to the point where the amount of blood there was had leaked through the walls and was dripping down the outside of the house. Police responded to the 3-story, 6-bedroom home because they got a 911 phone call stating that there was an unconscious female at 11:58 in the morning. Before they made the phone call, the surviving roommates called friends and asked them to come over. They didn't know what to do. They were in shock. The police went in. The first body they found was female, and she was found on the floor. So that was Xana. The second body they found was Ethan's, and it was clear to them that he had forced entry wounds. The third floor, two females in the same room, which were Kaylee and Madison, and it was this room that created the amount of blood that caused it to seep through the walls and drip down the outside of the house. Kaylee and Maddie, those were the two women in the second room. They had been best friends since 6th grade. They had gone to middle school together, junior high, high school, and when it came time for them to choose their colleges, they decided to go to the same one. They lived their life together. They were best friends. And they died on the same day in the same horrible manner. A gruesome and bloody scene. At least one of the victims had protective wounds. But there is some that come out in the case that said that perhaps there was more than just one victim, but that we know that at least one victim tried to fight off the attacker. It said that it's possible that the others had been sleeping. But then again, Xana was on the floor and Ethan was not. There was no forced entry into the home, which led police to question whether the killer was very familiar with his house or he knew somebody who lived in the house. Now, these adult students were not children, and this home on King Street was well known for being a party house. In fact, police had to come twice because they were called because of the noise. The strange thing is that on the second time they were called, the house was full of people, but not one of the 6 roommates who actually lived there were home. None of them. So it's very likely that the person who had access to this home did know it very well, having been there through possibly numerous parties, including parties where those 5 girls weren't even there. When the 911 call did come in, it said that they needed aid. When the story first came out, they said that one of the surviving roommates was out in the yard throwing up and fainting. But later accounts say that it was because they thought one of the victims was still alive, so they called in as an unconscious person. The identity of the person who called 911 was not released, but police confirmed that the caller was not considered a suspect. When police arrived, the door was open. There was no damage inside the house. Nothing appeared to be missing. The 2 surviving roommates were still on the property when the police came, as were the friends of the victims. All victims were pronounced dead at noon. Detectives stated they believe that the killings occurred sometime between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Upon searching the residence, officers came up with Xana's dog, which she shared with Ethan, and the dog was alive and unharmed on the 3rd floor. On the evening of November 13th, the university canceled classes for November 14th, and it also scheduled a candlelight vigil to be held at the University of Idaho Administration Building on the evening of November 16th, but then it postponed it 2 weeks. From the days of the killings, investigators initially said that there was no risk to the community. But 3 days later, Moscow Police Chief James Fry said We cannot say that there is no threat to the community. And because of that, fall break, which is already scheduled to begin after November 18th, with classes resuming on November 28th, most every student was gone. Their parents came, collected them, or they drove home. And they began an early Thanksgiving holiday. Other residents who stayed were very scared. They described being anxious, cautious. A number of professors canceled their classes. And then, because of weather concerns, the candlelight vigil was moved indoors to the Kibbe Dome and held on the evening of November 30th. The fathers of Xana and Ethan criticized the limited flow of information from the police and the university to the families of the victims. And then TikTokers, who were self-proclaimed psychics and social media users, began to speculate and to spread rumors and misinformation about the case on social media. In response, the Moscow Police Department had to get on TV and criticize these internet sleuths for creating rampant online rumors and disrupting the investigations and causing fear. On December 2nd, the news release stated, there is speculation without factual backing, stoking community fears and spreading false facts. Moscow Police Captain Roger Lanier said, tracking down rumors and quelling rumors about specific information and specific events that may not have happened at all is a huge distraction. We are not releasing specific details as we do not want to compromise this investigation. They also warned that people harassing or threatening those potentially involved with the case would face criminal charges. The investigations of the stabbings was led by the Moscow Police Department and supported by the Idaho State Police and the FBI. And altogether, there were 130 members of law enforcement from 3 agencies working on this case. Autopsies on the 4 victims were performed in Spokane, Washington. I went to school with a son of the coroner for the city of Spokane, Washington. The Latah County coroner stated that the victims all appeared to have been stabbed multiple times. As a side note, my family settled and founded the town of Latah, Washington, many, many years ago. The fatal wounds in the chest and upper body were what killed them. It is said that most of the wounds, almost all of the wounds, were exclusively on the face and the torso. They had been stabbed with a large knife, and if not the same knife, similar ones. However, the knife was identified as a military-style K-bar fixed knife. None of the victims showed any signs of being sexually assaulted. Neither were they tied up or gagged. No weapon has been recovered, although the police did find a used fixed blade sheath. The surviving roommate, who reportedly saw the suspect, described him as a stranger, around 5 feet 10 inches tall, not very muscular, slim build, athletically built, with bushy eyebrows. On November 19th, Moscow police requested the public provide any video of the house that had been recorded the night of the killings. A phone tip line and email were created through the FBI for the public to submit this information. And as of December 5th, there had been 2,600 emailed tips, 2,700 phone calls, and 1,000 digital media submissions who reportedly were submitted to the tip lines. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, investigators reported having received at least 15,000 tips regarding the case. Initially, the police thought that it was possible that there was more than one perpetrator, considering that it took 16 minutes to kill 4 people. But they have concluded that it was one person. They believe it was a targeted attack, but they have not concluded if the target was the residence or its occupants. There had been rumors that the target had been Kaylee, but like I just said, The police have not said that, or if it was just the house in general, anybody in the house would have been the target. Now, that being said, on November 23rd, in a press conference, the Moscow police chief said that the authorities had received a number of tips, but one of those had mentioned that Kaylee had a stalker. They were unable to identify that stalker or individual at the time of that press conference, and why this claim received a lot of attention at the time. As I said, there has been no stalker found, and the reason for the murders has never been pinned down. After receiving hundreds of tips from the public, on December 15th, police announced that they were searching the records of approximately 22,000 fifth-generation Hyundai Elantras made between 2011 and 2013. A camera in the area captured a video of a white or light-colored Elantra around the time of the murders, which investigators noticed had made multiple passes along the same route near the residence. In fact, the phone of the person who drove that car had pinged 12 times between June and the day of the murders, being driving right in front of the house on King Street. And if that wasn't enough, surveillance recorded obtained by the investigators also showed that Elantra passed by the King Street home 3 times on the day of the killings, beginning around 3:29 a.m. and then again at 4:04 a.m. and then the Elantra returned to the home for a 4th time. In the back of the house was a sliding glass door, which is how one of the surviving victims said that the intruder had left. Next to that sliding glass door was a parking area, which was unable to have been seen if you were looking straight towards the house. At 4:20 a.m., that car was seen speeding away from the victim's neighborhood. So around that time, investigators in neighboring Pullman, Washington, a college town adjacent to Moscow, which I explained earlier, began an investigation into a 28-year-old male named Brian Christopher Koberger. That white Elantra belonged to him, and he was a PhD candidate and a teacher assistant. He had left and driven it home to his father's home in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania for the Thanksgiving break. Koberger's Elantra was a later year than the original police description. However, Koberger was pulled over twice within a nearly 5-mile radius by the Indiana State Police on Interstate 70 outside of Greenville, Indiana, for following too close or tailgating. The FBI denied allegations that they had directed the Indiana State Police to make those stops. What I was hearing from people in Washington and Idaho, was that the FBI had directed them to make the stops so that they could identify the driver to see if he matched the description that the surviving woman described as the intruder. The FBI had data that showed that Koberger's phone had stopped connecting to the network at about 2:47 a.m. in Pullman on November 13th, before reconnecting at around 4:48 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, which is near US Highway 95 south of Moscow. Cell phone data also shows that his phone utilized a cell tower near the victim's home at around 9 a.m. on November 13th, approximately 5 hours after the killing. And I have something coming up that makes that even more chilling. Investigators also obtained 3 unidentified male DNA samples from the crime scene, which included DNA found on a tan leather knife sheath found on Maddie's bed. Using a public genealogy database, something like 23andMe, authorities reportedly identified a partial match to an individual with a familial connection to Brian Kohberger. Investigators recovered trash from outside Kohberger's family's home in Pennsylvania for the DNA, which they stated was consistent with being the source of the DNA on the knife's sheath. Before he was arrested, investigators monitored Kohberger's movements from outside of his parents' home. He was seen multiple times wearing surgical gloves, and he was observed putting trash bags inside a garbage can of their neighbor. The items were sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing. Authorities also said that Kohberger had cleaned his car inside and out, not missing an inch. According to authorities, a search of the home where Kohberger was arrested revealed a knife, a pistol, a black face mask, as well as ID cards inside a glove in a box. They also found a pet hair, a dog hair, and Xana owned a dog. Kohberger was taken into custody by the FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police on December 30th at the home of his parents. At the time of his arrest, authorities found Kohberger in the kitchen dressed in a shirt and shorts while wearing examination gloves and putting trash into separate Ziploc baggies. Now, there have been rumors that have said that there were people who had seen Kohberger at parties in which the 4 victims had been at. It is known that none of them knew him personally, as he did not go to the University of Idaho. He's been described as weird and creepy by women whom he does know, and that they found him to be ice cold. Here's what's happened since his arrest. On August 29th, 2023, the defense asks for a change of venue, considering that the city is so small, everybody knows everybody. I suppose they didn't believe that that would be the safest place for him to be put on trial. On September 5th, 2024, defense says that the death penalty violates the U.S. Constitution. On September 6th, 2024, a new venue is set for the trial. On September 12th, 2024, the Supreme Court of Idaho orders that the trial be moved 300 miles away to the state capital of Boise, Idaho. On October 8th, 2024, the trial is set to start August 11th, 2025. On November 20th of 2024, the death penalty is on the table. On February 19th, 2025, Judge Hibbler denied several motions by the defense to suppress key DNA. He also denied what is called a Franks hearing, which is when the defense wants to challenge the validity of the information used to get a search warrant. On March 4th, there were unsealed court documents saying that Kohberger exhibits features of autism, and if he is found guilty, the death penalty would be unconstitutional, and that his mannerisms could cause the jurors to be prejudiced against him. And while this is going on, prosecutors asked tech companies like Apple and Amazon for their help in tracking all of his movements, everything that happened on his phone, and narrowing it down. On July 4th of 2023, the university planned to demolish the house where the murders had occurred, but the family members were against it because there was still a lot of information in the house, and they thought that visually to take a jury to the house would have an impact on them so they could see how he moved so quickly and where he was when he walked by the survivor. On August 23rd of 2003, Kohberger waived his right for a speedy trial. It wasn't until December 14th in 2023 that Kohberger's lawyers were allowed to enter the building. And then on December 28th, the house was demolished against the wishes of the parents. The university said that the condition of the house, as it stood now, would not be helpful in trial because it was in disrepair. Kohberger's defense said that they were going to release information that showed that Brian Kohberger often drove late-night drives. Why he drove by this particular house, I don't know what the explanation is for, but apparently he liked to take late-night drives. On March 6, 2025, parts of texts sent between the two survivors and the 911 transcripts were released. One of the texts referred to a masked man. That text was sent by Bethany Funk to Dylan. Dylan wrote back and said, "No one is answering the phone." And then she wrote again and said, "I'm really confused right now." And those texts were going on at 4:22 a.m. On March 12th, prosecutors revealed that Kohberger's team plans to say that someone planted the knife sheath with his DNA inside the King Road home. On March 19th, new court filings presented a trove of new details, including the fact that Brian Kohberger bought a knife matching the sheath and took a selfie just 4 hours after the murders. 1 hour later, his phone pinged outside the house again. They also want jurors to see that his body type matches what the survivor described and that he has bushy eyebrows like the survivor described. And that description was by Dylan, and she said that she stood about 3 feet from him. On April 9th, a judge must consider whether to allow a certain text message and 911 call, a 3D model of the apartment house, and the term bushy eyebrows. The defense asked that the term bushy eyebrows not be allowed to be in anybody's testimony because Brian has bushy eyebrows. And they said that that would influence the jury and they might just convict him for having bushy eyebrows. On April 24th, the death penalty is said to still be possible for him. On May 15th, the jury selection is said to start on July 30th, and the opening statements for this case are supposed to start on August 11th of 2025. So when the trial starts and information starts coming in, I'll do my best to keep up and let you guys know what is happening. Thank you for coming to my channel. Thank you to Mark for suggesting this. At first, I had some reservations about doing it, not just because it feels strange to me reporting on something that's hits so close to home, but also because it's hard when family members are still in the midst, in the throes of what is happening. He hasn't even gone to court yet, but I hope that I handled this with respect to the victims and the families. Good night.